The wagon wheel had broken 3 miles back, and Katherine Zimmer was now reduced to picking through the rubbish heap behind Miller's General Store in Abiquiu, New Mexico territory, her skirts trailing through dust and debris as she searched for anything that might feed her 2 young sons. The year was 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, making the black morning dress she wore feel like a furnace against her skin. She had been a widow for 8 months now, ever since her husband Thomas had been trampled by a spooked horse, leaving her with 2 boys, a failing homestead, and debts that seemed to multiply like locusts. "Mama, did you find anything?" 7-year-old Jacob called from where he sat in the shade of the building, keeping watch over his younger brother. Katherine straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her pale skin. In her arms, she clutched a few bruised vegetables that had been tossed out, half a loaf of bread gone stale, and some bones that might make a thin soup. "A bit," she said, forcing brightness into her voice that she did not feel. "Enough for supper tonight." She was 24 years old and felt ancient. The face that had once been called pretty in her Ohio hometown was now gaunt, her green eyes ringed with shadows, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to soften the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose, giving most of her portions to Jacob and 4-year-old Samuel, watching them grow tall and healthy while she grew hollow. "Madam, you should not be digging through trash." The voice came from behind her, deep and startling. Katherine spun, nearly dropping her meager findings, and found herself looking up at a man on horseback. He was tall, even seated, with broad shoulders that blocked out the sun, casting her in his shadow. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds that regarded her with something between concern and disapproval. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a dust-covered shirt that might have once been blue, and leather chaps that marked him as a working rancher. "I do what I must," Katherine said, lifting her chin despite the humiliation burning through her. She clutched her scraps closer to her chest. The man swung down from his horse with practiced ease, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. He was even taller standing, well over 6 feet, and Katherine had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He could not have been more than 30, she judged, with the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed. "Andrew Xavier," he said, removing his hat briefly in greeting. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. "I own the Double X Ranch about 5 miles north of town." "Katherine Zimmer," she replied stiffly, then added because politeness had been drilled into her since childhood. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Xavier, but as you can see, I am managing." His eyes flicked to the scraps in her arms, then to her boys sitting in the shade, then back to her face. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "That is not managing," he said quietly. "That is starving." The words, spoken so plainly, so truthfully, hit Katherine like a physical blow. Her eyes stung with sudden tears that she blinked back furiously. She would not cry. She had promised herself after Thomas died that she would not waste water on tears when her sons needed every drop she could provide. "I have pride, Mr. Xavier, even if I have little else," she said, her voice tight. "Pride does not fill bellies," he replied. He was not being cruel, she realized. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" Katherine could not remember. 3 days ago. 4. "That is none of your concern." Andrew Xavier studied her for a long moment, then turned and walked to his horse. He pulled a burlap sack from his saddlebag and held it out to her. "Take it." "I am not accepting charity," Katherine said, even as her stomach cramped with hunger at the thought of what might be in that sack. "Then consider it a loan," Andrew said, "or payment for a service. My housekeeper recently quit to move back east with her daughter. I need someone to cook and clean. The work is hard, but I pay fair wages and meals come with the position. You and your boys can stay in the guest house on my property." Katherine stared at him, her mind racing. It could be a trap. She had heard stories of women in desperate situations being taken advantage of by men who promised work and delivered something far different. But she had also heard of Andrew Xavier. The rancher was known in Abiquiu as a hard man but a fair one, someone who dealt honestly and kept his word. His ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, running cattle and horses across thousands of acres. "Why would you offer this to a stranger?" she asked suspiciously. "Because I need the help and you need the work," Andrew said simply. "And because watching you dig through garbage does not sit right with me." He pushed the sack into her arms on top of her scraps. "There is bread, cheese, dried beef, and some apples in there. Feed your boys. Think about my offer. If you are interested, come to the ranch tomorrow morning. Anyone in town can tell you how to find it." Before Katherine could respond, he had mounted his horse again and was riding away, leaving her standing in the dust behind the general store, holding more food than she had seen in weeks. Jacob appeared at her elbow, his blue eyes wide. "Mama, what did that man want?" Katherine looked down at her son, then at the sack in her arms, then at the departing figure of Andrew Xavier. "I think," she said slowly, "he might have just saved our lives." That evening, in the tiny, cramped room they rented above the saloon, Katherine watched her sons eat the food Andrew Xavier had given them. She took only a small portion for herself, still unable to quite believe that this bounty was real. The bread was fresh, the cheese rich and creamy, the dried beef salty and satisfying. Samuel got more on his face than in his mouth, laughing as he tried to catch the crumbs, and Jacob ate with the desperate intensity of a child who had known too much hunger. After they had eaten their fill, and she had tucked them into the narrow bed they all shared, Katherine sat by the window and looked out at the dark streets of Abiquiu. The town was small, barely more than a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts clustered along the road that led to Santa Fe. It was not the life she had imagined when she had married Thomas and headed west 5 years ago, full of dreams about land and opportunity and building something that would last. Thomas had been a dreamer, but not a practical man. He had bought a homestead that turned out to have poor soil and little water, had invested in livestock that sickened and died, had borrowed money from anyone who would lend it with promises that next year would be better. And then he had died, and Katherine had discovered that next year would not be better at all. It would be impossible. She had tried to keep the homestead going, but without Thomas, she had no hope of working the land herself. She had tried to find work in town, but jobs for respectable women were scarce, and most people looked at a widow with 2 small children and saw only liability. She had sold everything she could sell, and still the debts remained. The homestead had been seized 2 months ago. Since then, she and the boys had been living in this rented room, surviving on Katherine's occasional work doing laundry or mending, and the charity of the church when she could swallow her pride enough to accept it. Andrew Xavier's offer felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But was it safe to grab hold? Katherine knew she had little choice. If she did not accept, she and her boys would soon be on the street, or worse, separated if the territorial authorities decided she could not care for them. The thought of losing Jacob and Samuel was more terrifying than any risk Andrew Xavier might pose. She would go to the ranch in the morning. The ride out to the Double X Ranch took most of the morning, walking the 5 miles with Jacob and Samuel. Katherine carried Samuel part of the way when his short legs grew tired, and Jacob walked beside her with the determined expression he wore when trying to be brave. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, all red rocks and scrub brush, with the Jemez Mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. The sun beat down mercilessly, and by the time the ranch came into view, Katherine's dress was soaked with sweat, and her feet ached in her worn boots. But the sight that greeted them made her breath catch in her throat. The Double X Ranch was vast, with a large main house built of adobe and wood, several outbuildings including a massive barn, corrals full of horses, and pastures where cattle grazed. It spoke of success and permanence, of a man who had carved out something substantial from this unforgiving land. As they approached, a large dog came bounding up to them, barking excitedly. Samuel shrieked and hid behind Katherine's skirts while Jacob stood his ground, though his face had gone pale. "Rex, get back here!" Andrew Xavier's voice rang out across the yard. He emerged from the barn, brushing hay from his shirt, and the dog immediately wheeled around and trotted back to his side. "Sorry about that. He is friendly but does not know his own size." Katherine relaxed slightly, her hand on Samuel's head. "No harm done. We are just not used to dogs." Andrew walked over to them, his eyes taking in their dusty, weary appearance. "You came," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been relief. "You made a fair offer," Katherine replied. "I would like to accept if the position is still available." "It is," Andrew said. He crouched down to be at eye level with her sons. "And who are these men?" "This is Jacob and this is Samuel," Katherine said, placing a hand on each boy's shoulder. "Good to meet you both," Andrew said seriously, holding out his hand for Jacob to shake. Jacob did so hesitantly, his small hand disappearing into Andrew's large one. "I hope you will be happy here. There is plenty of space to run and explore, though you will need to stay away from the horses unless I or one of the ranch hands is with you. And Rex here is a good fellow once you get to know him." Samuel peeked out from behind Katherine's skirts to look at the dog, his fear already fading into curiosity. Rex wagged his tail and licked his chops, panting in the heat. Andrew straightened and gestured toward a smaller building set back from the main house. "That is the guest house. It has 2 bedrooms, a sitting area, and a small kitchen, though you will do most of your cooking in the main house. Let me show you around." The guest house was better than anywhere Katherine had lived in years, possibly ever. The rooms were clean and well-maintained, with real beds and furniture, glass windows that let in light, and a sturdy roof overhead. The sight of it made Katherine's throat tighten with emotion she fought to control. "The privy is out back," Andrew said, standing in the doorway and giving them space to explore. "The well is between here and the main house. You and the boys can settle in today and tomorrow. You can start work the day after if that suits you." "That is very generous," Katherine said, running her hand over the smooth wood of a table in the sitting room. "What exactly would my duties be?" "Cooking 3 meals a day, cleaning the main house, laundry, mending when needed," Andrew said. "I have 6 hands who work the ranch full-time and they eat in the bunkhouse, so you would only be cooking for me. The house is not large, but it needs a woman's touch. My housekeeper left it in good order, but that was 2 months ago, and I have let things slide since then." "And the wages?" Katherine asked, knowing she should have asked this first but having been too desperate to care. $20 a month, plus room and board for you and your boys," Andrew said. "That includes meals, milk from the cow, eggs from the chickens, and any vegetables from the garden. On Sundays, you are free to attend church or do as you please. $20 a month. It was more than Katherine had made in the last 3 months combined, and with room and board included, she might actually be able to start saving, to build something for her son's future. It felt too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "You could hire anyone. Why a widow with 2 young children? Most men would see us as a burden." Andrew was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes holding hers. "My mother was a widow," he said finally. "My father died when I was 8 years old and my sister was just a baby. My mother worked herself nearly to death trying to keep us fed and clothed, taking in laundry, sewing, anything she could do. I watched her struggle for years until she remarried, and even then, times were hard. I swore to myself that if I ever had the means, I would help women in similar situations." He paused, then added, "And as I said, I truly do need the help. This is not charity. You will earn every penny." Katherine believed him. She saw the sincerity in his face, heard it in his voice. "Then I accept, Mr. Xavier. Thank you." "Andrew," he said, "if we are going to be sharing meals and living on the same property, you might as well call me Andrew." "Katherine," she replied, then hesitated. "Or Kate. My friends used to call me Kate before." "Before you became a widow and had to be proper all the time," Andrew said, and there was understanding in his voice. "Something like that," Katherine admitted. "Well, Kate," Andrew said, and something about the way he said her name, warm and easy, made her feel lighter than she had in months. "Welcome to the Double X Ranch. I hope you and your boys will be happy here." The first few days at the ranch passed in a blur of activity. Katherine threw herself into her work with an energy born of gratitude and relief. She scrubbed the main house from top to bottom, washing windows until they gleamed, sweeping and mopping floors, beating rugs and organizing cupboards. She cooked hearty meals of beef and beans, biscuits and gravy, roasted vegetables from the garden that one of the ranch hands maintained with varying success. Andrew was gone most days, out on the range with his men, checking cattle and horses, mending fences, doing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. But he returned each evening for supper, washing up at the pump outside and coming into the dining room with damp hair and clean clothes, the smell of soap replacing the scent of horse and leather. Those suppers were quiet at first, almost awkward. Katherine served the food and then retreated to the kitchen, eating her own meal there while Andrew ate alone in the dining room. But on the third evening he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his plate in hand. "Why are you eating in here?" he asked. Katherine looked up from where she sat at the small kitchen table with Jacob and Samuel. "It is more appropriate. You are the employer, I am the employee." "This is not some fancy house in Boston," Andrew said. "It is a ranch in New Mexico territory, and I am tired of eating alone. If you are comfortable with it, I would appreciate the company." Katherine hesitated, then nodded. Social conventions seemed less important out here, where survival and practicality mattered more than the rigid rules she had grown up with. "All right. The boys and I will join you." After that, they ate together every evening, and slowly, gradually, they began to talk. At first it was just small things. Andrew asking how Katherine's day had been, whether she needed anything from town, whether the boys were settling in well. Katherine asking about the ranch, about the cattle, about his plans for the upcoming season. But as days turned into weeks, the conversations deepened. Andrew told her about his childhood in Texas, about his father who had been a Texas Ranger and died in a shootout with cattle rustlers when Andrew was young, about his mother who had struggled to raise him and his sister, eventually remarrying a shopkeeper who gave them stability but never quite felt like family, about how Andrew had left at 16 to work on ranches, learning the trade from the ground up, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own land here in New Mexico territory. He had built the Double X from nothing over the past 8 years, working dawn to dusk, surviving drought and disease and all the challenges that came with ranching. Katherine told him about her own childhood in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, raised to be respectable and proper. About meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 18, being swept away by his enthusiasm and dreams of adventure. About the journey west, the early days when everything had seemed possible, and then the slow realization that Thomas's dreams were bigger than his abilities. About the loneliness of the homestead, the fear as the debts mounted, and the devastating shock of his death. "You miss him?" Andrew asked one evening, then immediately looked uncomfortable, as if regretting the question. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is all right," Katherine said. She thought about it, really thought about it. "I miss what I hoped he would be. I miss the security of being married, of having someone to share the burden with. But if I am being honest, and perhaps this is a terrible thing to say, our marriage was not happy. Thomas was a good man in many ways, but he was reckless and impractical, and by the end, I was more his mother than his wife, trying to manage everything while he chased one failed scheme after another." Andrew nodded slowly. "Grief is complicated," he said. "It is all right to acknowledge that." "Do you speak from experience?" Katherine asked. "Not with a spouse," Andrew said. "But I lost my mother 3 years ago, and my relationship with her was complicated. I loved her, but I also resented her for staying with my stepfather when he was cruel to me. It took me a long time to make peace with feeling both things at once." These conversations, quiet and honest in the lamp-lit dining room after the boys had gone to bed, created a bond between them that Katherine had not anticipated. She found herself looking forward to the evenings, to the sound of Andrew's horse returning, to the simple pleasure of adult conversation with someone who listened and understood. And she began to notice other things too. The way Andrew always made sure to compliment her cooking, even on days when she felt she had done nothing special. The way he brought small gifts from town without being asked. A peppermint stick for each of the boys, a new novel for Katherine to read in the evenings, a bolt of fabric so she could make herself a new dress that was not the heavy morning black she had worn for months. "You do not need to be in full mourning anymore," he had said when he gave her the fabric, a soft blue cotton that reminded her of summer skies. "It has been nearly a year, and I think you have earned the right to some color in your life." Katherine had taken the fabric with trembling hands, touched by his thoughtfulness in a way that made her chest ache. That night, sitting in the guest house with her sewing basket, she had begun to cut and stitch, creating something new from what he had given her. Summer turned to fall, and the heat began to ease into cooler days and cold nights. The cottonwood trees along the creek that ran through the property turned gold, and the air took on the crisp quality that meant winter was coming. Katherine had been at the ranch for 3 months, and it felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since leaving Ohio. Jacob and Samuel had thrived. They had gained weight, their cheeks filling out, their eyes bright with health. They spent their days exploring the ranch under the watchful eyes of the ranch hands, learning to ride gentle horses, helping collect eggs from the chickens, and playing with Rex, who had become their devoted companion. They laughed more than Katherine had heard in years, and the sound of it was the sweetest music she knew. Andrew had become not just her employer but her friend. They talked every evening, sometimes for hours, ranging over topics from politics to philosophy to the simple details of their days. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, a way of making observations about life on the ranch that made her laugh. and she found herself sharing things with him she had never told anyone, thoughts and feelings and dreams she had kept locked away. She was also becoming increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with friendship. The way his sleeves rolled up exposed forearms tanned and strong from work. The way he smiled at her, warm and genuine, making her feel seen in a way Thomas never had. The way his presence filled a room, solid and reassuring, making her feel safe. It confused her, these feelings. She had been a widow less than a year. Surely it was too soon to feel anything for another man. Surely it was inappropriate, given that Andrew was her employer, and she was living on his property under his protection. But the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each passing day, until she could no longer deny them to herself, even if she refused to act on them. One October evening, after a long day of preparing preserves for winter, Katherine was exhausted. She served supper, sat down to eat with Andrew and her boys, and found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. The boys were already nodding over their plates, tired from a day spent helping one of the ranch hands mend a fence. "You all look done in," Andrew observed. "Why do not you get the boys to bed, Kate? I will clean up the kitchen." "That is not your job," Katherine protested, even as she swayed with fatigue. "And you have done enough for today," Andrew said firmly. "Go on. I can wash some dishes." Too tired to argue, Katherine herded Jacob and Samuel back to the guest house, helped them wash and change into their nightshirts, and tucked them into bed. She sat with them for a few minutes, singing a soft lullaby her own mother had sung to her, watching their eyes close and their breathing deepen into sleep. When she returned to the main house to make sure Andrew had managed the cleanup, she found him standing at the sink, his back to her, his hands in soapy water as he scrubbed a pot. There was something endearing about seeing this strong, capable rancher doing such a domestic task, his movements careful and thorough. "You did not have to do this," Katherine said softly. Andrew turned, startled, then smiled. "I told you I would, and I am not completely helpless in a kitchen. I managed for 2 months before you came, though I will admit the results were barely edible." Katherine moved to stand beside him, picking up a dish towel to dry what he had washed. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Katherine was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how their arms occasionally brushed, sending little jolts of awareness through her. "Kate," Andrew said suddenly, his voice serious, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Katherine said, her heart beginning to beat faster. "Are you happy here?" he asked, not looking at her, keeping his eyes on the plate he was washing. "Truly happy, because if there is anything you need, anything I can do to make things better for you and the boys, I want to know." "I am happy," Katherine said, and realized as she said it that it was completely true. For the first time since coming west, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely happy. "Andrew, you have given us so much. A home, security, kindness. I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Andrew said. "You work hard, harder than you should. You have made this house a home again. You have brought life and warmth and—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "And I am the one who should be thanking you." He set down the plate he had been holding and turned to face her fully. His hands were dripping with soapy water, and there was a smudge of flour on his shirt that she must have missed when cleaning up from the baking earlier. His gray eyes were intense as they met hers, and Katherine felt her breath catch in her throat. "Kate, I need to tell you something," Andrew said, his voice low. "And if it is unwelcome, if it makes you uncomfortable, just say so and we will never speak of it again. You will still have your position here and your home, and I will never hold it against you. I promise you that." "All right," Katherine whispered, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. I have feelings for you, Andrew said simply, directly, his eyes never leaving hers. I have for weeks now, maybe longer. I did not plan for this to happen. I truly did just need a housekeeper, and I truly did just want to help someone who reminded me of my mother. But somewhere along the way, it became so much more than that. I look forward to coming home in the evenings because you are here. I find myself thinking about you during the day, wondering what you are doing, what you are thinking. I watch you with your boys and I see the kind of mother I wish I had had, the kind of woman I want in my life. And I know this is complicated. I know you are still in mourning and I am your employer and there are 1,000 reasons why this is not appropriate, but I had to tell you the truth. I care about you, Kate, deeply. Katherine stood frozen, the dish towel clutched in her hands, her mind reeling. She had suspected, had hoped, but hearing it spoken aloud was something else entirely. And now she had to decide what to do, what to say, how to respond to this man who had given her so much and was now offering her even more. "Andrew," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I do not know what to say." She saw the hope in his eyes dim slightly, saw him start to retreat, and she reached out impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, solid and real. "I do not know what to say," she repeated, "because I feel the same way and it terrifies me." The hope flared back to life in his expression. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because what if I am wrong again?" Katherine said, the words tumbling out. "I thought I loved Thomas. I thought I knew what I wanted. And I was wrong and it nearly destroyed me. What if I am wrong about this too? What if these feelings are just gratitude or relief or loneliness? What if I ruin everything we have built here by wanting more?" "Kate, look at me," Andrew said gently. He took her hand, the one resting on his arm, and held it between both of his. "You are not wrong. What we have is real. I know the difference between gratitude and affection, between friendship and something deeper, and I think you do too if you are honest with yourself." Katherine looked up at him, at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had given her and her sons a home and security, who made her laugh and listened when she talked and looked at her like she was something precious. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he was right. What she felt was real. It was not just gratitude or relief. It was something true and strong and terrifying in its intensity. "I am still in mourning," she said weakly. "People will talk." "Let them talk," Andrew said. "You were a widow doing what you had to do to survive when I found you. You have suffered enough. If you want to move forward with your life with me, then that is between you and me and no one else." "The boys," Katherine started. "Love me already, I think," Andrew said with a small smile. "Jacob asked me yesterday if I would teach him to rope cattle. And Samuel told me I was his best friend after I helped him catch a frog by the creek. If we are fortunate enough to become a family, I think they will be happy about it." A family. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Katherine had never dared to hope for such a thing again, had resigned herself to a life of solitude and struggle. But here it was, being offered to her by a man who already felt like home. "I do care about you," Katherine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "So much that it frightens me. You have become so important to me, Andrew. You and this place and the life we have here. I wake up happy now. I go to bed without fear. And it is because of you." "Then let us see where this goes," Andrew said, squeezing her hand gently. "We do not have to rush anything. We can take our time, let things develop naturally. But I needed you to know how I feel. I could not keep pretending anymore." Katherine nodded, her eyes stinging with tears that were equal parts joy and fear. "I want to try," she said. "I want to see what this could be." Andrew smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. "That is all I am asking for. A chance." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made Catherine's heart flutter. Then he released her hand and stepped back, giving her space. "It is late," he said. "You should get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow." Katherine nodded, though she knew she would not sleep tonight, her mind too full of everything that had just happened. She finished drying the last few dishes in a daze, said good-night to Andrew, and walked back to the guest house in the cool darkness. Her thoughts whirling inside, she checked on her sleeping sons, then sat in the rocking chair by the window, looking out at the ranch. Lamplight glowed in the window of the main house where Andrew was, and she wondered if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. She had come to this place broken and desperate, picking through scraps just to survive. And Andrew had filled her arms with plenty. Food and shelter and safety. But more than that, he had filled her life with something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Katherine had experienced with Thomas. Where Thomas had been impulsive and passionate, all grand gestures and big promises, Andrew was steady and thoughtful. He courted her in small ways that meant everything. He brought her wildflowers from the range, their colors brilliant against the autumn landscape. He sat with her in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes just reading together in comfortable silence. He taught Jacob and Samuel to ride, patient and kind with their mistakes, praising their successes. He fixed a loose board on the guest house porch without being asked. He noticed when she was tired and took on tasks to lighten her load. And slowly, carefully, they began to touch, his hand on her back as he passed behind her in the kitchen, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee in the morning. Sitting together on the porch in the evenings with their shoulders touching. Each touch was deliberate, meaningful, building a connection between them that went deeper than words. The ranch hands noticed, of course. 6 men living in the bunkhouse, working alongside Andrew every day. They would have to be blind not to see the way he looked at Katherine, the way she smiled when he entered a room. But they were good men, loyal to Andrew, and if they gossiped among themselves, they kept it private and treated Katherine with nothing but respect. One of them, an older cowboy named Charlie who had worked the ranch since Andrew first bought it, pulled Katherine aside one day while she was hanging laundry. "Madam, I hope you do not mind me speaking plainly," he said, his weathered face kind. "Of course not, Charlie," Katherine said, pausing in her work. "The boss is a good man, the best I have ever worked for," Charlie said. "He is fair and honest and he takes care of his own, but he has been lonely, I think, these past years. Building this ranch has been his whole life, and he has had no one to share it with. Since you and your boys came, I have seen him happier than I have ever seen him. I just wanted you to know that, in case you were wondering whether this is real. It is. I have known Andrew Xavier for 8 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Katherine felt her eyes fill with tears. "Thank you, Charlie. That means more than you know. He is going to ask you to marry him," Charlie said matter-of-factly. "Probably soon. And I hope you say yes, because you all belong together. It is plain as day to anyone with eyes." Katherine laughed, wiping at her tears. "I hope he asks," she admitted, "because I know what my answer will be." November brought the first snow, a light dusting that turned the ranch into a winter wonderland. Jacob and Samuel were ecstatic, having never seen snow before their time in New Mexico, and they spent the morning building a small snowman under Rex's watchful supervision. Katherine stood on the porch of the main house, watching them play, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cold. Andrew came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "They are good boys," Andrew said, watching Jacob help Samuel roll a snowball for the snowman's head. They adore you, Katherine said. Jacob told me last week that he wished you were his father. Andrew was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I wish that too. I wish I could give them my name, give you my name, make this official and permanent. Katherine turned to look at him, her heart beginning to race. Andrew. He took her hand, holding it gently in his larger one. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards. It has only been a few weeks since I told you how I felt. But Kate, I have known since the day you arrived that you were someone special, and these past months have only confirmed it. You are strong and kind and resilient. You are a wonderful mother. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be a better man, and I love you. I am in love with you completely and irrevocably. Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily, naturally. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it. Then marry me, Andrew said, turning to face her fully, both his hands holding both of hers now. Not because it is practical, though it is. Not because the boys need a father, though they do, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because when I think about the future, every vision includes you. Marry me, Kate. Let me take care of you and the boys for the rest of my life. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Yes, Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Katherine wrapped her arms around him, feeling safe and loved and home. They stood like that for a long moment, neither wanting to let go, while snow fell gently around them and the boys played in the yard, oblivious to the scene on the porch. When they finally pulled apart, Andrew cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, a first kiss that felt like a beginning. Katherine kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope into it, tasting the salt of her tears mixed with the sweetness of the moment. Mama, Mama, look at our snowman. Samuel's voice broke through and they separated, both laughing. It is magnificent, Katherine called back, her voice shaky with emotion. Jacob had stopped playing and was staring at them from across the yard, his young face serious. Mr. Xavier, were you kissing my mama? I was, Andrew said, not at all embarrassed. He walked down the porch steps, Katherine following, and crouched down to Jacob's level. And I hope that is all right with you because I just asked her to marry me and she said yes. Which means if you boys are agreeable, I will become your stepfather. Jacob's eyes went wide and then he broke into a huge grin. Really? You will live with us all the time and be our papa, really, Andrew confirmed. If that is what you want. That is what I want, Jacob said and threw himself at Andrew, hugging him around the neck. Andrew hugged him back, his eyes meeting Katherine's over Jacob's shoulder, and the love in his gaze made her heart feel like it might burst. Samuel, not quite understanding but not wanting to be left out, toddled over and hugged Andrew's leg. Andrew scooped him up with one arm, still holding Jacob with the other, and stood, both boys clinging to him happily. Well then, Andrew said, I guess we are going to be a family. They were married 3 weeks later on a cold December day in Abiquiu's small church. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Andrew had ordered specially from Santa Fe, with her auburn hair pinned up and crowned with a wreath of dried flowers. Andrew wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking nervous and handsome in equal measure. The church was full, to Katherine's surprise. The ranch hands were there, of course, and many of the townspeople who had come to respect Andrew over the years. Even some of the people who had looked down on Katherine when she was digging through garbage came, curious to see the widow marry the wealthy rancher. Katherine did not care. She had eyes only for Andrew as she walked down the aisle, Jacob and Samuel at her sides in their new clothes, also courtesy of Andrew's generosity. When she reached the front, and Andrew took her hand, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Andrew he could kiss his bride, Andrew did so with such tenderness that Katherine heard several women in the congregation sigh. The reception was held at the ranch, in the main house that was now officially her home. The ranch hands had helped decorate, hanging paper chains and setting up tables laden with food. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Charlie made a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and humorous, talking about how Andrew had needed a woman's touch and had clearly gotten more than he bargained for. As evening fell and the guests began to leave, Katherine found herself standing in the doorway of her new home, watching the last of the wagons depart down the road. Andrew came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine replied, leaning back against him. "Thank you, Andrew, for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for offering me hope when I had none, for loving me." "Thank you for saying yes," Andrew said, "for trusting me, for giving me a family. I love you, Kate." "I love you too," Katherine said, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. The boys were already asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day, tucked into their beds in the room that was now permanently theirs. Tonight, for the first time, Katherine would sleep in the master bedroom, in Andrew's bed as his wife. The thought filled her with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. But when they finally retired for the night, Andrew was patient and gentle, making her feel cherished and safe. They loved each other slowly, learning each other's bodies and hearts, and afterward, Katherine lay in his arms feeling more complete than she had in her entire life. "I was so lost," she whispered in the darkness, "and you found me." "We found each other," Andrew corrected softly. "I was building a ranch, but I was not building a life. You gave me that, Kate, you and the boys. You gave me a reason for all of this." Katherine kissed his chest, right over his heart, and closed her eyes, drifting off to sleep feeling utterly content. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, but a joyful one. Katherine was no longer just the housekeeper, but the lady of the house, Andrew's partner in all things. He consulted her about decisions regarding the ranch, valued her opinions, treated her as an equal in every way that mattered. Jacob and Samuel thrived under Andrew's care, growing strong and confident. Andrew taught them everything he knew about ranching, about horses and cattle, about the land and how to read it. He was firm but kind, setting boundaries but never harsh, exactly the kind of father the boys needed. In the spring, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. She had lost a baby between Jacob and Samuel, a miscarriage that had nearly broken her, and she was terrified it would happen again. But she was also filled with joy at the thought of giving Andrew a child of his own, a child born from their love. When she told him, Andrew's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then pure, radiant joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down and apologized, afraid he had been too rough. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Katherine said, laughing at his concern. "I have done this before, remember." "I know, but this is our child," Andrew said, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Ours. I never thought I would have this, Kate, a wife, a family, a child of my own. You have given me everything." The pregnancy was easier than Katherine's previous ones, perhaps because she was well-fed and less stressed, or perhaps because she was simply happier. Andrew fussed over her, insisting she not work too hard, hiring a woman from town to help with the heavier housework. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and making promises about the future. In November, exactly 1 year after Andrew had proposed, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine was afraid, but Andrew stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Andrew cried. "We have a son," he said, his voice breaking with emotion as he held the tiny bundle. "Kate, we have a son." They named him Thomas, after Katherine's first husband, which might have seemed strange to some but felt right to both of them. That Thomas had been flawed and had left Katherine in a difficult position was true, but he had also given her Jacob and Samuel, and that deserved to be honored. And Andrew, secure in Katherine's love, had no objection. But they called him Tommy to differentiate him from his late namesake, and Andrew Xavier quickly became the center of their world. Jacob and Samuel adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him, helping to care for him in the ways young boys could. Andrew was a devoted father, getting up in the night to help Katherine with feedings, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, staring at him with wonder as if he could not quite believe this tiny person was real. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Katherine grew more comfortable in her role, confident and secure in ways she had never been before. She made friends in town, hosted gatherings at the ranch, became known as a generous and capable woman. Jacob grew into a serious, responsible young man, clearly Andrew's protege, learning everything he could about running the ranch. Samuel was more playful and artistic, showing a talent for drawing and a way with animals that suggested he might become a veterinarian someday. And Tommy was a happy, curious child, toddling after his father and older brothers, wanting to do everything they did. 3 years after Tommy's birth, Katherine gave birth to a daughter. They named her Anne after Andrew's mother, and she was the image of Katherine with auburn hair and green eyes. Andrew, who had been fairly composed with Tommy, completely melted with Anne, utterly devoted to his little girl. "I am outnumbered now," he would joke, looking around at his wife and daughter and 3 sons. 5-1. I do not stand a chance." "You love every minute of it," Katherine would reply, and it was true. Andrew had built a successful ranch, but his family was clearly his greatest achievement and deepest joy. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Andrew took Katherine on a trip to Santa Fe, just the two of them, leaving the children in the care of Charlie and the ranch hands. It was the first time they had been alone together since Tommy's birth, and it felt like a second honeymoon. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, went to a theater performance, and simply enjoyed being a couple again without the constant demands of children and ranch. On their last night, they sat in their hotel room, Katherine in a new dress Andrew had bought her, looking out at the lights of the city. "You remember the day we met?" Andrew asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "How could I forget?" Katherine said, leaning back against him. "I was digging through garbage, and you rode up like some kind of rescuing knight. I had no idea that day that I was meeting the woman I would spend the rest of my life with," Andrew said. "I just saw someone who needed help and had the means to offer it. But from that very first conversation I was drawn to you, your strength, your dignity, even in such desperate circumstances. And I thought you were too good to be true," Katherine admitted. "A handsome rancher offering me a job and a home, it seemed like something from a fairy tale. And now?" Andrew asked. "Now I know it is real," Katherine said, turning to face him. All of this, our life, our family, our love, it is real and solid and permanent. You saved me, Andrew. You and this ranch and the life we have built together. You took a woman who was picking through scraps and gave her everything. You gave me just as much, Andrew said seriously. More, maybe. I had the ranch, but I did not have a life. I was just going through the motions, working and surviving, but not truly living. You changed that. You and the boys, and then Tommy and Ann. You made me understand what I was working for, what it all meant. Katherine kissed him, soft and deep, pouring 5 years of love and gratitude into it. I love you, she said against his lips. So much it still sometimes takes my breath away. I love you too, Andrew replied, for the rest of my life and beyond. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and challenges. There was a drought one year that tested the ranch's resources, but they managed to survive it through careful planning and hard work. There was an outbreak of influenza that swept through the territory, and Katherine nursed the entire family through it, terrified of losing anyone but determined to keep them all safe. There were the normal ups and downs of raising children, the scraped knees and hurt feelings, the teenage rebellions and young love. Jacob, at 20, fell in love with a girl from Abiquiu, a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah who fit into the family perfectly. They married and built a house on the ranch property, Jacob taking on more and more responsibility for the double X as Andrew began to slow down slightly, not as young as he once was. Samuel, at 18, announced his intention to go to college back east to study veterinary medicine, a decision that both broke Katherine's heart and filled her with pride. Andrew supported it fully, using his savings to pay for Samuel's education, saying that a man should follow his dreams. Tommy grew into a stocky, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as Andrew did, clearly destined to carry on the family legacy. And Ann, at 15, was already turning heads in town, much to Andrew's dismay and Katherine's amusement. On a cool spring evening, when Katherine was 42 and Andrew was 48, they sat together on the porch as they had done so many times before. The ranch spread out before them, successful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and love. Jacob's house was visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney where Sarah was preparing supper for her husband and their infant son, Andrew and Katherine's first grandchild. Tommy was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. Ann was inside, practicing piano, the music drifting out through the open windows. "We have built something good here," Andrew said, his hand finding Katherine's and lacing their fingers together. "We have," Katherine agreed. "Something strong that will last long after we are gone." "Do you ever think about that day in Abiquiu?" Andrew asked. "When I found you behind the general store?" "Sometimes," Katherine said. "It seems like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else. I was so desperate then, so lost. I could not see a future beyond the next meal the next day." "And now," Andrew prompted. "Now I cannot imagine any other life," Katherine said. "Every hardship I endured, every struggle, every moment of despair, it all led me here. To you, to this ranch, to our family, and I would not change a single thing." Andrew raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done that night so many years ago when he first told her he loved her. "You were collecting scraps," he said softly, "and I filled your arms with plenty. But Kate, you filled my life with everything that matters. You gave me a home in the truest sense, not just a house but a place where I belonged. You gave me children to carry on after me. You gave me love and partnership and joy. I am the one who was saved, not you." "We saved each other," Katherine said, squeezing his hand. "We found each other when we both needed finding, and we built this life together. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The air was sweet with the scent of spring flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was the same wild, harsh land that had nearly broken Katherine when she first came west, but now it felt like the most beautiful place on earth. Inside the house, Anne finished her piano piece and came out to join them, settling on the porch steps. Tommy emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, grinning. "The mare foaled," he announced. "A colt, strong and healthy." "That is wonderful," Katherine said, smiling at her youngest son. "Your first foaling handled all on your own." "Dad taught me everything I needed to know," Tommy said, looking at Andrew with clear admiration. Andrew nodded, pride evident in his face. "You did well, son." Jacob and Sarah appeared in the distance, walking over from their house with baby Michael in Sarah's arms. As the family gathered on the porch, talking and laughing, sharing the events of their days, Katherine felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what she had fought for, had survived for. Not just her own life, but this moment, this family, this love that surrounded her like a warm embrace. She thought of the woman she had been, thin and desperate, picking through garbage to feed her children, unable to see beyond her grief and fear. And she thought of the man who had seen her there and had not turned away, who had offered her not just charity but opportunity, not just work but hope. Their love story had not been conventional. It had not been quick or easy or without its complications. But it had been real, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, on shared values and common goals. They had chosen each other deliberately, thoughtfully, and they had built a life that reflected that choice. As the evening deepened into night, and the family eventually dispersed to their own homes and beds, Katherine and Andrew remained on the porch, neither quite ready to go inside. "Tell me something," Katherine said, breaking the silence. "That day you found me, when you offered me the job, did you have any idea this was how it would turn out?" Andrew considered the question carefully. "Honestly, no. I thought I was helping someone in need, maybe paying forward the kindness others had shown my mother. I thought I would get a good housekeeper and you would get stability. I did not expect to fall in love. I did not expect you to become my whole world." "But you are glad it happened this way?" Katherine asked, though she knew the answer. "Glad does not begin to cover it," Andrew said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kate. You and our children and this life we have built. I would not trade it for anything." "Neither would I," Katherine said. "Not for anything in the world." They went inside then, arm in arm, to the house that was truly their home, filled with memories and love and the promise of many more years together. Katherine paused in the doorway, looking back at the ranch one last time before closing the door. She had come here with nothing, broken and desperate, collecting scraps just to survive. And Andrew had filled her arms with plenty: food and shelter, security and comfort, children and grandchildren, love and joy and purpose. He had given her everything, but in truth, they had given each other what they both needed most: someone to share the journey with, someone to build a life alongside, someone to love completely and be loved by in return. The widow who had once picked through garbage was now the matriarch of a thriving ranch, a beloved wife, a devoted mother, a cherished grandmother. She had survived the worst and found her way to the best, and every day she woke up grateful for the path that had led her here. As she lay in bed that night, Andrew's arms around her, his breathing deep and steady beside her, Katherine allowed herself to fully feel the magnitude of what they had created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as all tomorrows did. There would be grandchildren to spoil and children to guide, a ranch to run and a home to maintain. There would be laughter and tears, triumphs and setbacks, the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived. But tonight, she simply rested in the peace of the present, in the warmth of her husband's embrace, in the knowledge that she was home in every sense that mattered. The harsh wilderness of New Mexico territory had tested her and nearly broken her, but it had also led her to Andrew, and that made every hardship worthwhile. In the years that followed, as they grew old together, as their family expanded with more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, as the ranch prospered and grew, Katherine never forgot those dark days when she had nothing. She used her position to help other widows in difficult circumstances, offering work or assistance, remembering what it felt like to be desperate and invisible. And Andrew supported her in this, just as he supported her in everything, the two of them partners in all aspects of life. They became known throughout the territory as a couple who embodied the best of what the West could be. Hardworking and successful, but also kind and generous, building something that would last. When Andrew was 68 and Katherine was 62, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge gathering at the ranch. All their children were there, along with their grandchildren, friends from throughout the territory, everyone who had been touched by their lives and their love. Jacob, now running the Double X with his own sons beside him, gave a toast. "My mother and father," he said, raising his glass, "taught us that love is not just a feeling but an action. It is choosing every day to put someone else first, to build together, to face challenges as a team. They took a broken family and made it whole. They took a piece of land and made it a legacy. And they took a chance on love and created something beautiful that will last for generations." To Katherine and Andrew Xavier. The crowd echoed the toast, and Katherine, sitting beside Andrew with tears in her eyes, felt overwhelmed by the fullness of her life. She looked around at the faces gathered there, at the children and grandchildren who existed because she had survived, because Andrew had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, because they had chosen to build a life together. "Happy, my love?" Andrew asked, his voice roughened by age but still steady, still sure. "Beyond measure," Katherine replied. "You filled my life with plenty, Andrew, more than plenty. You filled it with everything that matters." "And you filled mine," Andrew said, kissing her temple. "Every single day with you has been a gift." They lived another decade together, growing old side by side, watching their family flourish, taking joy in the simple pleasures of each day. Andrew's health began to fail when he was 76, his strong body finally giving out after a lifetime of hard work. But he faced it with characteristic dignity, ensuring that the ranch would continue smoothly under Jacob's leadership, making certain Katherine would be taken care of, saying goodbye to each of his children and grandchildren with love and grace. Katherine stayed by his side through it all, just as she had promised 38 years earlier when she vowed to love him in sickness and in health. She held his hand, told him stories, reminded him of their life together, all the moments big and small that had made up their shared journey. On a quiet spring morning with Katherine beside him and his family gathered near, Andrew Xavier passed peacefully from the world, his last words a whispered "I love you" to the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything. Katherine grieved, of course. The loss of Andrew left a hole in her life that could never be filled. But she did not despair. She had loved him completely and been loved completely in return, and that was more than many people ever got. She had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a whole family tree that existed because Andrew had stopped his horse one day behind a general store in Abiquiu and offered help to a desperate woman. She lived another 8 years, remaining at the ranch, surrounded by her family, still strong and capable into her 70s. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the early days of the ranch, about what it meant to build a life with someone. She continued Andrew's tradition of helping those in need, using her resources to make a difference in people's lives just as Andrew had made a difference in hers. And when Katherine Zimmer Xavier finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the house Andrew had built, her last thoughts were of that day so long ago when a rancher had found her collecting scraps and had changed her life forever. She had been lost and he had found her. She had been broken and together they had become whole. She had been surviving and he had taught her to truly live. The Double X Ranch continued for generations after, run by Jacob's sons, and then their sons, a lasting testament to what Andrew and Katherine had built together. And every member of the family knew the story of how it all began, with a widow collecting scraps, a rancher who saw her worth, and a love that transformed both their lives into something abundant and beautiful and lasting. In the end, Katherine's story was not one of rescue, though it had started that way. It was a story of 2 people finding each other at exactly the right moment, recognizing in each other what they needed, and choosing to build something together. It was a story of hard work and devotion, of challenges overcome and joys celebrated, of a family created and a legacy established. It was a love story, pure and simple, set against the harsh beauty of the Wild West, proving that even in the hardest places and the most difficult times, love could not only survive but thrive. And somewhere, in the spaces between the living and whatever came after, Katherine and Andrew found each other again, their hands meeting across the distance, their love transcending even death, eternal and unbreakable as the land they had loved and the family they had created together.